Nobody on Flight 847 knew that the quiet girl in seat 19A, clutching her worn tablet and staring out the window with those impossibly old eyes, carried a call sign that would make even the most hardened fighter pilots snap to attention, until the moment her name crackled across military frequencies and changed everything. Before you dive into this story, tell me, which country are you from? Comment below. Subscribe now because tomorrow I'm dropping the best story yet. You don't want to miss it. The Tuesday afternoon departure from San Diego to Washington Dulles seemed unremarkable as passengers settled into their seats, stowing carry-ons and adjusting air vents, while flight attendants moved through their practiced routines with professional efficiency. In seat 19A by the window, a slender girl who looked perhaps 12 or 13 arranged her belongings with careful precision, placing a tablet in the seat pocket, tucking earbuds into a small case, and smoothing a faded military patch she kept clipped to her backpack. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, and she wore comfortable travel clothes that suggested someone accustomed to long flights and airport layovers. Flight attendant Sarah Martinez paused at row 19 with her practiced smile, checking her passenger manifest before addressing the young traveler with the gentle tone reserved for children flying alone. "Hi, sweetie. I'm Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you today," she said, crouching slightly to be at eye level. "Are you comfortable? Do you need anything before we take off? Maybe some coloring books or a deck of cards to keep you busy during the flight?" The girl looked up with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, those eyes that seemed to carry experiences far beyond her years. "I'm fine, thank you," the girl replied softly. "I have my tablet and some books. I know the routine." The businessman in seat 19B glanced at his young seatmate with the tolerant amusement adults often show toward children in confined spaces, already mentally preparing for potential disruptions like restless fidgeting or endless questions. Across the aisle, an elderly woman smiled warmly at the girl, reaching into her purse to offer a package of fruit snacks with grandmotherly concern. "Here you go, dear," she said kindly. "Long flights can be boring for young people. Do you have games on that tablet?" The girl accepted the snacks with quiet gratitude, while the woman patted her hand and settled back, satisfied she had shown proper care for a child traveling without parental supervision. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, passengers around row 19 continued their casual observations of the young girl, constructing their own assumptions about her story based on limited information and typical expectations. Nobody noticed the way her fingers occasionally traced the edges of that military patch on her backpack, or how her gaze tracked the aircraft's movements with an understanding that went far beyond casual interest in takeoffs and landings. Nobody recognized that the tablet she carried contained not just games and movies, but detailed aviation manuals, tactical procedure documents, and communications protocols she had absorbed through countless hours spent in military hospitals and aviation facilities. The girl's name was Kayla Morrison, though that information meant nothing to the passengers and crew, who saw only a well-behaved 12-year-old making a routine journey across the country. What they could not know was that this quiet child carried an honorary call sign earned through extraordinary courage and inherited through profound loss. Phoenix was the name that belonged to her, given by F-22 Raptor pilots who had visited her during brutal chemotherapy treatments at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, where she had fought leukemia with a warrior spirit that inspired hardened combat veterans. Phoenix was also the legendary call sign of her mother, Major Sarah Phoenix Morrison, whose tactical brilliance and sacrifice during a classified mission over hostile territory had made her a legend in fighter aviation communities before her aircraft went down 3 years ago. During those long months of treatment, when Kayla's small body endured chemotherapy, radiation, and countless procedures that would break most adults, fighter pilots from nearby Naval Air Station North Island and Marine Corps Air Station Miramar had made regular visits to the pediatric oncology ward. They came in flight suits bearing squadron patches, bringing models of F-22 Raptors and other tactical aircraft. For Kayla, these visits meant more than distraction from pain. They connected her to the mother she had lost, to the aviation heritage that flowed through her blood, and to warriors who recognized in this child's eyes the same fierce determination that had made Major Sarah Morrison a legend among fighter pilots. Lieutenant Colonel Jake Viper Chen, an F-22 pilot with over 2,000 hours in the Raptor, had become particularly close to Kayla during her treatment, visiting every week to share stories of flying and to teach her about tactical aviation in ways that honored her intelligence and her mother's legacy. It was Viper who had formally proposed that Kayla receive the honorary call sign Phoenix, both to honor her mother's memory and to recognize the child's own rebirth from the ashes of life-threatening illness. The ceremony had taken place in the hospital courtyard with a dozen fighter pilots in dress uniforms, presenting Kayla with a custom flight patch bearing the Phoenix emblem while she stood straight and proud despite her fragile frame. From that moment forward, Kayla Morrison was known as Phoenix within military aviation communities, her story spreading through squadron ready rooms as an inspiration and reminder of courage that transcends combat missions. The fighter pilots had shared with her not just their respect but their knowledge, teaching her radio protocols, emergency procedures, tactical communication standards, and aviation principles during hospital visits that continued even after her treatment ended. They had given her access to flight simulators, walked her through cockpit procedures, and treated her as a fellow aviator whose age did not diminish her warrior spirit or capacity to understand complex operational concepts. Now, 6 months after being declared cancer-free, Kayla was making her first solo cross-country flight to visit her father's parents in Virginia. She had insisted on flying alone, demonstrating the independence that made her father both proud and worried. To everyone around her, she appeared as just another child, someone to be smiled at and helped and watched over with benevolent adult concern. And she accepted this role with quiet grace because she had learned through illness and loss that appearances often disguise deeper truths and extraordinary capabilities can hide within seemingly ordinary circumstances. The first 90 minutes of Flight 847 proceeded with perfect normalcy as the Boeing 737 cruised at 37,000 feet, following its program route eastward while passengers read, worked, or dozed. Kayla had accepted a ginger ale from Sarah and was reading an aviation manual on her tablet that appeared to casual observers as just another entertainment app. The businessman beside her had fallen asleep, and the elderly woman across the aisle had started her own nap, leaving Kayla in the quiet isolation she actually preferred. Then, without warning, the aircraft lurched violently to the left, throwing passengers against their restraints and sending service items crashing to the floor. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments while the aircraft shuddered and bucked, its nose pitching down in a steep descent that pressed passengers into their seats and triggered screams of terror throughout the cabin. The automated announcement system blared instructions to don oxygen masks, but the voice was nearly drowned by rushing wind that indicated pressurization failure and alarms that shrieked warnings. Kayla's hands moved automatically to her oxygen mask, securing it with practiced efficiency while her mind processed the aircraft's movements with analytical clarity that bypassed panic. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Hayes and First Officer Michelle Torres faced a nightmare scenario as multiple warning systems activated simultaneously, their instrument panels flashing red alerts for hydraulic failures, electrical malfunctions, and flight control anomalies that cascaded through critical systems with terrifying speed. Hayes fought the controls, trying to arrest the descent and stabilize the aircraft, but the response was sluggish and unpredictable. Torres worked frantically through emergency checklists, her training warring against rising panic. Mayday, mayday, mayday! United 847 Heavy experiencing multiple system failures, uncontrolled descent passing through flight level 270, requesting immediate assistance. Torres transmitted on the emergency frequency. Throughout the passenger cabin, chaos reigned as people screamed, prayed, and clutched at armrests while the aircraft continued its violent descent. Flight attendants struggled to maintain composure while trying to calm passengers and ensure everyone had oxygen masks properly secured. Sarah Martinez made her way down the aisle, gripping seatbacks for support, checking on passengers including the young girl in 19A. When she reached Kayla's row, Sarah was startled to find the child sitting calmly behind her oxygen mask, not frozen in shock, but actively studying the aircraft's movements with focused attention. "Sweetie, keep your mask on and stay in your seat," Sarah called over the noise. "Everything's going to be okay." Kayla nodded but caught Sarah's arm as the flight attendant started to move on. The descent angle is too steep and the control response is wrong, Kayla said, her young voice steady. This isn't just decompression. There are flight control failures, probably hydraulic or electrical. They need passenger assessment if they're going to attempt an emergency landing. Sarah stared at the child in confusion, barely processing technical words that seemed impossible from a 12-year-old. What? How do you? Sweetie, just stay calm. I know about aviation emergencies, Kayla said simply. My mom was a fighter pilot, and I've studied procedures. If the crew needs assistance or information, I can help. Tell them Phoenix is on board. The words made no sense to Sarah, who saw only a frightened child trying to feel useful. Sarah patted Kayla's shoulder and moved on to check other passengers, dismissing the girl's offer as confusion. But Kayla understood that her knowledge, however unexpected from someone her age, might be exactly what this emergency required. In the cockpit, Hayes and Torres had managed to partially arrest the descent, pulling the aircraft into a shallow dive rather than the deadly plunge, but their situation remained desperate. We've lost hydraulic system A completely, system B is fluctuating, electrical bus 2 is offline, and I'm getting uncommanded roll inputs, Hayes reported, his voice tight with concentration. Torres continued transmitting emergency declarations while trying to coordinate with air traffic control for the nearest suitable airport. But the reality was becoming clear. They were descending toward mountainous terrain with degraded controls and limited options. The air traffic controller had already initiated protocols for catastrophic flight emergencies, notifying military assets in the region. Among those assets were two F-22 Raptor stealth fighters from Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, conducting routine training when they received urgent tasking to intercept and assess the civilian aircraft in distress. Major Alex Granite Stone and Captain Ryan Torch Williams broke from their training pattern and accelerated toward the coordinates, their advanced sensors already tracking the descending 737. Looks like they're fighting for control, Granite observed. Multiple system failures from the emergency calls. We'll get visual and provide whatever assistance we can. The F-22s closed rapidly on Flight 847, their speed and agility allowing them to match the airliner's descent and take up positions off its wings where their pilots could conduct visual assessment. Granite maneuvered close enough to see into the cockpit windows, observing the pilot's intense efforts, and he could see external signs of emergency. An open panel near the tail suggesting hydraulic or control system damage, irregular movements of control surfaces. United 847, this is Granite leading Raptor flight. We are visual with your aircraft conducting assessment, he transmitted. Confirm your status and emergency nature. Captain Hayes, struggling with controls while sweat poured down his face, felt relief hearing the fighter pilot's calm voice. Raptor flight, United 847, we have multiple hydraulic failures, electrical system degradation, and flight control anomalies cascading through our systems, he responded. We're losing altitude and having difficulty maintaining controlled flight. Unknown if we can reach a suitable airport for emergency landing. Granite processed this rapidly, coordinating with air traffic control about how F-22s could assist beyond visual assessment. The fighters could provide precise position information, help guide the aircraft toward emergency landing sites, and serve as communication relays if systems degraded further. Back in the passenger cabin, Kayla listened to the aircraft sounds and felt its movements with analytical awareness her training provided. Understanding the situation was desperate, but not yet hopeless if the right decisions were made. She watched Sarah and the other flight attendants trying to calm passengers while preparing for possible crash landing procedures. The businessman beside her was awake and terrified, gripping his armrest with white knuckles. The elderly woman across the aisle was crying quietly, clutching a photograph. All around Kayla, people faced their potential mortality with whatever resources they possessed. Kayla made a decision, understanding that offering help might mean revealing knowledge that would shock the adults around her, but recognizing that lives depended on every possible resource being utilized. She unbuckled carefully and made her way forward toward Sarah. Sarah, Kayla called, catching the flight attendant's attention. I need to tell the pilot something important. Please, this matters. Sarah turned with frustration, seeing the child who should be secured in her seat. Kayla, get back to your seat right now. This is not the time for... but Kayla interrupted with words that cut through the noise. My call sign is Phoenix, Kayla said clearly, her young voice carrying authority that seemed impossible. I'm known to the fighter pilot community. The F-22 pilots outside this aircraft will recognize that call sign. Tell the cockpit that Phoenix is on board and available to assist with emergency coordination if needed. Please, Sarah, this is real. Sarah stared at the child, seeing something in those steady eyes that penetrated her assumptions and forced her to consider that this seemingly ordinary girl might possess extraordinary knowledge or connections. The flight attendant made a split-second decision and keyed her intercom to the cockpit. Captain, this is Sarah in the cabin. I have a passenger, a young girl, who says her call sign is Phoenix and that she's known to the military fighter community. She's offering to assist with emergency coordination. In the cockpit, Hayes and Torres exchanged confused glances at this bizarre message delivered during the most critical emergency of their careers. The captain's first instinct was to dismiss it as nonsense, but the specific mention of a military call sign made him hesitate. Raptor Flight, United 847, we have a passenger claiming the call sign Phoenix, allegedly known to your community, Hayes transmitted, his voice skeptical. Can you confirm any significance to this information? There was a moment of silence, and then Granite's voice returned with an intensity that shocked everyone listening. United 847, did you say Phoenix? Granite asked, his calm demeanor cracked by sudden emotion. Confirm you have Phoenix on board that aircraft, Hayes confirmed, bewildered, and heard Granite key his mic again with something like awe in his voice. Captain, Phoenix is the honorary call sign of Kayla Morrison, 12-year-old daughter of the late Major Sarah Morrison, who gave her life in combat 3 years ago. The call sign was also awarded to Kayla herself for extraordinary courage during her battle with leukemia. She is known and honored throughout the fighter community. If Phoenix says she can assist, I strongly recommend you listen to her. Torch and I both know her personally. She possesses knowledge far beyond her years. The revelation stunned the cockpit crew, forcing them to reassess everything they thought they understood about their passengers. Torres looked at Hayes with wide eyes, and the captain made another split-second decision, choosing to trust the fighter pilot's assessment. Send the girl forward, Hayes ordered through the intercom. Sarah received the authorization with shock, but she guided Kayla toward the cockpit, helping the girl maintain a balance as the aircraft continued its troubled descent. When Kayla entered the cockpit, stepping carefully into the cramped space where two exhausted pilots fought desperately to save their aircraft, both Hayes and Torres turned to see not the aviation expert they had hoped for, but a slender child who barely looked old enough for middle school. The disappointment on their faces was evident, but Kayla met their eyes with steady composure. Captain, First Officer, I'm Kayla Morrison. Call sign Phoenix, she said with calm professionalism. I know you're facing multiple system failures. I can help coordinate with the F-22s, assist with emergency procedure verification, and provide tactical communication support if you need to focus on flying. My mother was Major Sarah Morrison, F-22 pilot, and the fighter community has trained me in aviation protocols and emergency procedures. Hayes wanted to dismiss her, but the sincerity in her voice, in the endorsement from the Raptor pilots, made him pause. More critically, he and Torres were drowning in the overwhelming demands of flying a crippled aircraft while managing emergency checklists and communications with multiple agencies. If this girl could handle even some of the communication load, it might free the pilots to focus on keeping the aircraft in the air. Okay, Phoenix, Hayes said, using her call sign because the fighter pilots had endorsed it. We need to coordinate our position and emergency status with those F-22s while we work through our procedures. Can you handle that communication? Kayla nodded and accepted the headset Torres offered, her small hands adjusting it properly, while her mind shifted into the tactical communication mode she had practiced countless times with the pilots who had mentored her. Granite, Torch, this is Phoenix, she transmitted with clear professional diction that shocked both fighter pilots. I'm in the cockpit of United 847 to assist with coordination. The crew is managing multiple cascading failures in hydraulic and electrical systems with degraded flight controls. They're going to focus on flying while I coordinate with you for emergency support. Request you provide precise position updates and assist with identifying nearest suitable emergency landing sites based on our current descent rate and control capability. In his F-22 cockpit, Granite felt emotion surge through his chest hearing that young voice on the emergency frequency, remembering the brave child who had fought cancer with warrior spirit and who carried forward her mother's legendary call sign. "Phoenix, Granite copies all," he responded, his voice thick with emotion he fought to control. "We have you visual and are tracking your descent. Current position is 40 miles northeast of Albuquerque at flight level 195 and descending. Based on your descent rate and control issues, Albuquerque International is feasible if you can maintain current flight path. We will provide guidance and position updates. Phoenix, we will get you home. That's a promise." Kayla's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed, hearing the commitment and care in Granite's voice, but she maintained her professional composure because the emergency demanded nothing less. "Roger. Granite. Phoenix copies," she replied steadily. "Captain Hayes, did you copy that position and recommendation?" Hayes nodded, amazed at the professional exchange he had just witnessed between fighter pilots and a 12-year-old girl, and he adjusted his approach to aim for Albuquerque while fighting controls that seemed determined to kill everyone aboard. Over the next 12 minutes, as Flight 847 descended toward Albuquerque with its crippled systems, Kayla became the critical link between the cockpit, the fighter escorts, air traffic control, and emergency services preparing for possible disaster. She relayed precise technical information about system failures to Granite and Torch, who used their external visual assessment to confirm damage and provide additional information the cockpit instruments could not show. She coordinated with air traffic control about approach procedures and runway preparation, communicating with clarity and proper protocols that made controllers forget they were speaking with a child. She verified emergency checklist items for Torres when the first officer's attention was pulled to other critical tasks. Through it all, she maintained the calm professionalism that her mother's fellow warriors had taught her. The passengers in the cabin remained unaware of the child coordinating their rescue, knowing only that the aircraft's violent movements had stabilized somewhat and that the pilots seemed to be attempting an emergency landing rather than falling helplessly from the sky. Sarah and the other flight attendants prepared people for crash landing procedures, demonstrating brace positions while maintaining brave faces despite their terror. Throughout the cabin, strangers held hands and offered comfort, human compassion rising above individual fear. In the cockpit, Hayes wrestled with controls that fought every input, his arms aching from the constant battle to keep the aircraft on approach to Albuquerque International's longest runway where emergency equipment waited. Torres monitored their rapidly decreasing altitude and airspeed, calling out parameters while working through the final approach checklist with Kayla's verification support. "Phoenix, we're going to make it," Hayes said with more confidence than he felt, wanting to reassure the brave child who had given them critical support. "Granite, Phoenix, we are on final approach to runway 26 at Albuquerque. Gear down, flaps configured for emergency landing," Kayla transmitted with steady professionalism. "Emergency equipment is positioned. Captain Hayes has requested you maintain visual and provide position updates through landing." Granite confirmed, positioning his F-22 to observe the landing while staying clear of the approach path, his heart pounding with fierce hope that Phoenix would survive this emergency that had challenged everyone aboard. The Boeing 737 crossed the runway threshold with its damaged systems barely maintaining control, Hayes using every ounce of skill earned through 30 years of flying to guide the crippled aircraft toward the concrete that represented survival or disaster. The touchdown was hard, the aircraft slamming onto the runway with force that jarred every passenger and sent overhead bins flying open. But the wheels held and the aircraft stayed on the centerline as Hayes deployed thrust reversers and fought to maintain directional control. The aircraft slewed sideways slightly, but Hayes corrected with desperate intensity and brought the aircraft to a shuddering stop 3,000 feet down the runway, finally safe on solid ground. The cabin erupted in cheers, prayers of thanksgiving, and sobbing relief as passengers realized they had survived the unsurvivable. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft immediately, but it sat intact and stable, its passengers shaken but alive. In the cockpit, Hayes and Torres sat trembling with exhaustion and relief, barely able to process that they had succeeded despite odds that should have killed them all. Kayla sat quietly in the jump seat where she had coordinated the emergency response, tears finally streaming down her young face as the adrenaline that had sustained her professional composure drained away, leaving the frightened child who had faced death with extraordinary courage. "Phoenix Granite, congratulations on that landing," came the fighter pilot's voice over the radio, thick with emotion. "Outstanding performance by everyone aboard. You honored your call sign and your mother's legacy. Well done, warrior." Kayla could not speak through her tears, could only key the mic in acknowledgement, while Hayes reached over to gently squeeze her shoulder in gratitude beyond words. Torres was crying too, overcome by relief and by the impossible reality that a 12-year-old child had helped save their aircraft. Sarah appeared in the cockpit doorway, having heard from the crew about the girl's role, and she gathered Kayla into her arms while understanding flooded through her about who this quiet child really was. The evacuation proceeded in orderly fashion as passengers filed down emergency slides to the tarmac, where paramedics waited. But miraculously, there were only minor bumps and bruises among the 147 souls who had faced death together. News crews were already arriving, drawn by reports of the dramatic emergency landing and the F-22 fighter escort that had guided the stricken airliner to safety. But none of these officials and investigators yet knew about the child who had coordinated critical communications and provided tactical support that exceeded what anyone expected from someone her age. As Kayla stood on the tarmac, wrapped in an emergency blanket while paramedics checked her, she looked up to see two F-22 Raptors making a low pass over the airport, their wings waggling in salute to the survivors below. Granite and Torch had requested permission for the flyby, wanting to honor the passengers and crew who had faced their emergency with courage, but especially wanting to salute the young warrior who carried the Phoenix call sign with distinction that matched her mother's legendary service. Kayla watched the sleek fighters climb away into the clear New Mexico sky, her heart full of emotions too complex for her years. Grief for the mother she still missed desperately. Gratitude for the warriors who had honored her with knowledge and respect. Pride in having helped save lives when circumstances demanded she exceed normal expectations. Sarah stayed close to Kayla, protective instincts now informed by understanding of who this remarkable girl truly was, and she contacted authorities about ensuring Phoenix received proper care and that her family was notified of her safety. The businessman from seat 19B approached hesitantly, having learned that the quiet child he had dismissed had played a critical role in their survival. "I heard what you did," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you for helping save us all." The elderly woman from across the aisle came next, hugging Kayla fiercely while crying tears of joy and wonder that this young person possessed such extraordinary capability. Captain Hayes and First Officer Torres emerged from their cockpit after completing shutdown procedures, both searching immediately for the child who had been their tactical communications coordinator. They found Kayla surrounded by paramedics and well-wishers, and Hayes pushed through gently to kneel before her. "Phoenix," he said formally, using her call sign with deliberate honor, "you saved this aircraft and everyone aboard through your knowledge, courage, and professionalism. I have flown for 30 years and faced many emergencies, but I have never witnessed anything like what you did today. Your mother would be incredibly proud. I am honored to have flown with you." Kayla's tears returned, overwhelmed by the captain's words and by the weight of everything she had experienced. But she stood straight despite her trembling and met his eyes with the dignity that warriors recognize in each other, regardless of age. "Thank you, Captain," she replied softly. "My mom taught me that warriors help each other when things get hard, and the fighter community taught me that knowledge means nothing unless you use it when people need help. I'm just glad everyone is safe." Hayes stood and saluted her formally, an unprecedented gesture from an airline captain to a child passenger, but one that felt absolutely appropriate given what Phoenix had contributed. Within hours, news of the emergency landing and the child who had assisted the crew spread through aviation communities and into national media. The fighter pilot community responded with fierce protectiveness, their channels emphasizing that Phoenix had performed with distinction but deserved privacy and respect rather than invasive publicity. Lieutenant Colonel Jake Viper Chen, who had mentored Kayla through her cancer treatment, flew immediately to Albuquerque to be with her, bringing the support of the warrior family that had claimed her as one of their own. When Viper arrived at the hotel where Kayla was staying under the protection of airline officials and family friends, he found the young girl sitting quietly on a balcony, still wearing the clothes from the emergency, her Phoenix patch prominently displayed on her backpack. She looked small and fragile in the fading afternoon light, a child who should have been playing games rather than carrying the weight of having helped save 147 lives. When she saw Viper approaching, her composure finally cracked completely, and she ran to him with a sob that released all the fear and stress she had contained during the crisis. Viper caught her and held her close. This hardened combat veteran with classified missions and confirmed kills, and he let his own tears fall freely because Phoenix was not just an honorary call sign or an inspiration. She was a child he loved like his own daughter, a warrior who had earned his respect, but who still needed the comfort and protection that adults owe to young people who face impossible circumstances. "You did good, Phoenix," he murmured into her hair while she cried against his flight suit. "You did so good. Your mom was watching over you today, and she was proud. I'm proud. But you don't have to be strong right now. You're safe, and you can just be Kayla for a while." The permission to be just a frightened child rather than the competent tactical coordinator she had forced herself to become during the emergency released something in Kayla, and she cried harder, her small body shaking with sobs that expressed terror she had suppressed, grief for her mother that had resurged during the crisis, and exhaustion from carrying responsibilities that should never have fallen on someone her age. Viper simply held her, providing the safe space where warriors can finally release the emotions they contain during crisis. The story of the child in seat 19A, whose call sign shocked F-22 pilots and whose knowledge helped save an aircraft, became part of aviation lore, shared in training sessions and squadron ready rooms, as an example of how expertise and courage can come from unexpected sources. Within the military aviation community, Phoenix remained a known quantity, her actions during Flight 847 joining her mother's combat record as part of a family legacy that inspired young aviators and reminded veterans that the warrior spirit transcends age, rank, and circumstance. Kayla Morrison continued to grow, her path forward filled with possibilities shaped by the extraordinary experiences of her young life. She remained cancer-free, her body recovering fully from the illness that had nearly taken her life. She excelled academically, her intelligence and discipline honed by the knowledge she had absorbed from fighter pilots and by the maturity that comes from facing mortality and choosing courage. She maintained close connections with the military aviation community, attending squadron events and serving as an inspiration to other young people facing serious illness or difficult circumstances. The passengers and crew of Flight 847 went on with their lives, forever changed by the emergency they had survived together but returning to normal routines. But they carried with them the knowledge that a child had helped save them, that courage and competence had emerged from the least expected source, and that assumptions about age and capability can blind people to the extraordinary resources that exist within seemingly ordinary individuals. For Kayla Morrison, call sign Phoenix, the emergency aboard Flight 847 became a defining moment in a life already marked by extraordinary challenges and profound losses. She had faced cancer with courage, had lost her mother to combat, had earned an honorary call sign from warriors who recognized her spirit, and had helped save 147 lives when circumstances demanded she use knowledge that most adults did not expect a child to possess. These experiences shaped her into someone far more mature than her years, someone who understood both the fragility of life and the power of courage, someone who carried forward a legacy while creating her own path through a future full of possibilities. The Phoenix call sign represented not just survival, but the strength to rise again and again, no matter what challenges and tragedies life presented. The story that had begun with a quiet child in seat 19A had transformed into a legend of courage that would inspire future generations of aviators, reminding them that warriors come in many forms, that knowledge and bravery deserve respect regardless of their source, and that the legacy of fallen heroes lives on in those who carry forward their values and their determination to make a difference when circumstances demand the very best that human courage and competence can offer.